Welcome to Courier Conversations. I'm your host, Jeff Robinson, with my co-host, Travis Kearns. And today, we're going to talk about something that normally we love talking about, and that is football. And normally we're talking about Tigers and Bulldogs and things like that. But today we want to talk about the big football game that they had over the weekend that America almost takes as a national holiday, and that is Super Bowl Sunday.
Yep.
As Travis and I talked about this, as we listened to all the things surrounding the advertisements and even what the announcers discussed during the game, we want to just consider some questions about the Super Bowl, and not really the halftime show. No, that's the sort of the flavor of the month. We're not interested in talking about that so much, but just answering the question, when does football become idolatry? And looking at our own hearts, our own minds here as two Southerners who love college football. We're glad they don't play on Sunday. That's for sure,
yes,
right, Travis? So,
yep.
But is it a good use of the Lord's Day? What do we think about statements like football is what unifies us in this country, or things like Sundays are for football? So, Travis, this was a really good idea you had, so I'm going to kick it to you and let you kind of introduce this a little more depth for us.
Yeah, sure. So before the Super Bowl started, during the pregame, there were a number of commentators. There were some NFL ads, things like that. In fact, I heard Chris Collinsworth say this a few times. And of course, as I mentioned, those NFL ads said it as well. Things like what you just mentioned. Sundays are for football. One thing I heard 3 or 4 times, the greatest Sunday of the year, the best Sunday of the year is Super Bowl Sunday. And then heard things like, if there's one thing that can unify us all together, it's football. Football brings families together. Football brings friends together. On and on it goes. Now, the thing is to some degree, you can't blame the NFL for this because they're business. They're not in this just to provide football for everybody to enjoy. They're in it to make a dollar. They're a normal business operation, just like Major League Baseball, just like NASCAR, just like the NCAA for college sports. But I don't know that I've heard another sports organization speak about their sport in the same way the NFL did about the Super Bowl prior to the game, during all the pregame talking and commentating and bloviating, that, especially things like Sundays are for football, or the best Sunday of the year is Super Bowl Sunday. So that really struck me pretty strongly, thinking, again, not to blame the NFL because they're a business organization. This is what they do. They're trying to advertise their product. But how many people were hearing that and buying that and saying things like, yeah, Sunday is for football. It just struck me as something that we should talk about, and how we should, or rather ask the question, how should we think about this as Christians? Are Sundays for football? Is the best Sunday of the year, from a Christian perspective, is the best Sunday of the year Super Bowl Sunday? I would venture to say that we would answer absolutely not, that the best Sunday of the year is not Super Bowl Sunday, regardless of who may or may not be playing, regardless of the halftime show or halftime shows, however many there are. But what is this all about? So that's where the idea came from. Yep.
Well, and as I said earlier, to be clear, we both love sports, love football. I am a former sports writer, and have even had to examine my own heart, especially with me, it's been baseball. Is this something that I love too much that has replaced Christ on the throne of my own heart? So this is something, issue I've had to think through a lot. And of course, I do think it is different for Christians and the secular world, as far as how we use Sunday, because we believe every Sunday is sacred, and sacred in the sense is we go to worship. We use it for worship.
Mm-hmm.
We believe that's the day that God has set aside for the worship of Himself, for His people, and rest. And so we, as evangelical Christians, that's how we use Sunday. And so our Sundays aren't for football, even if we watch football. And that's not our purpose here is also not to decide whether or not we think it's a sin to watch football on Sunday. I don't think either one
Right.
of us that believes it is. I don't. I know there are Christians who disagree with that, and that's fine. There's a place for variety among evangelicals. I think when it comes to what we do with the Lord's Day, even if you're a Sabbatarian or not. But we use the Lord's Day as the Lord's Day. Now there was a time, particularly Major League Baseball, and the time 75 years ago or so, when men like Branch Rickey, who owned the Dodgers, and Christy Mathewson, one of the early star pitchers in big league baseball, would not. Mathewson wouldn't pitch on Sunday because of his Christian commitments, and Branch Rickey would not attend Dodgers games, or he was also general manager of the St. Louis Cardinals and the Pittsburgh Pirates and other teams. But of course, Branch Rickey is best known for bringing Jackie Robinson to the big leagues in 1947 and breaking the color barrier. And what a wonderful day that was, April 15th, 1947. I think that should be a national holiday because of what it did for civil rights and what it did for sports, and really that discussion is so much better than the woke discussions we have about race today, in my opinion. If that's another podcast for another time, maybe in April we'll do that, Travis. I think no one thinks about that, it seems like, anymore. The appropriateness of saying that Sunday is for football. But it was a time in sports history. There have been NFL players back in the maybe 50s and 60s who would not play, or who had trepidation about playing on the Lord's Day. And of course, football's always been on the Lord's Day. And of course, the most famous example of this is Eric Liddell, the great Olympic runner,
Yep.
the Chariots of Fire movie, who would forego a gold medal instead of running on Sunday. So it's just not a discussion we have anymore, and I think that's just a product of a loss of how we think theologically about things like the Lord's Day.
Yeah, I just checked the Baptist Faith and Message Article 8 is on the Lord's Day. And it reads, this is Baptist Faith Message 2000. First day of the week is the Lord's Day. It's a Christian institution for regular observance. It commemorates the resurrection of Christ from the dead and should include exercise of worship and spiritual devotion, both public and private. Activities on the Lord's Day should be commensurate with the Christian's conscience under the lordship of Jesus Christ. So obviously the Baptist Faith and Message 2000 allows for various other activities insofar as the Christian's conscience allows it. Now, Jeff, the institution where you and I did master's and doctoral work and then served on faculty and staff for a while at Southern Seminary has, as you well know, other governing documents, theological governing documents, one of which is the Abstract of Principles. The abstract in the Lord's Day is very straightforward. It says this: the Lord's Day is a Christian institution for regular observance and should be employed in exercises of worship and spiritual devotion, both public and private, resting from worldly employments and amusements, works of necessity and mercy only accepted. So not accepted, accepted. So you get pretty different conclusions drawn by Baptists from across the years. Obviously, the Abstract of Principles written by South Carolina Baptists, initially ratified by South Carolina Baptists when Southern Seminary was founded here. The Baptist Faith and Message 2000, not a South Carolina specific document, but a national SBC document. So, yeah, there are some differences here. I imagine 1689, the London Confession, is probably closer to the Abstract than it would be the Baptist Faith and Message 2000. Not knowing that as well as you would off the top of my head, I imagine Westminster is probably the same among Presbyterians. It's closer to the Abstract than it would be to the Baptist Faith and Message 2000, that worldly, secular jobs, so employment and or entertainment, should be, unless absolutely necessary, should be excused on those days and or on that day and used specifically for worship and private family study and devotion. Yeah, but yeah, just the idea that the NFL would go so far as to say Sundays are for football, and then the best Sunday of the year is Super Bowl Sunday. It's, again, not blaming the NFL. They're trying to make their money, but it was shocking to hear it nonetheless.
Well, somewhere the Puritans in the old world in England and the new world here in America who settled this country, actually, are spinning in the graves that we're even having this conversation because they
Oh
were
yeah.
devoted to the Lord's Day. And of course, if you don't know the Puritans were, you've read, a lot of our listeners may are familiar, no doubt, with The Pilgrim's Progress, the book written by John Bunyan, and probably the second best-selling book after the King James Bible in the history of printed books.
Hmm.
Bunyan was a Puritan. Jonathan Edwards was an American Puritan. Bunyan was in England 100 years before Edwards. But in those days, they thought about the Lord's Day. They honored the Lord's Day. It was a matter of church discipline to dishonor the Lord's Day. And yes, you're right. The Second London Confession, which, by the way, the abstract of principles is an abstract of the Second London Confession, and back in the founding the SBC, and 100 years before that, here in America, most associations like the one they had of, and especially here in South Carolina, had their own confession
Hmm.
of faith, and churches did, and it was some derivative of the Second London Confession, typically, the
Right.
Charleston Association in particular, and probably all the churches, most of the churches planted here in the upstate where you and I both are, where we both serve, were Charleston Confession churches. And the chapter 22 of the Second London Confession was on religious worship and the Sabbath day. And they call it the Sabbath day, the Christian Sabbath, which is, I don't think, a bad term. And there were 8 paragraphs devoted to this. This is how seriously
Hmm.
they took it. So just to say it's for football or for anything other than worship, the Puritans who wrote this in 1689 in England, and their those who came after them, their sons and daughters, would have had a stroke. Just to give you just here's the first paragraph. I'll read this for us. One of 8 again. The light of nature shows that there is a God who hath lordship and sovereignty over all, is just, good, and doth good unto all. It is therefore to be feared, loved, praised, called upon, trusted in, and served with all the heart, and with all the soul, and with all the might. So, before I finish this first paragraph, there was a fear of God. They established who
Hmm.
God is, that this God is to be worshiped, the one God, worshiped and loved and praised and feared. And so, again, I think they would have been afraid almost to ask this question: should we be playing football? They'd say, no, we should be playing football on Sunday. They would have answered this. But it goes on to read, but the acceptable way of worshiping the true God is instituted by himself, and so limited by his own revealed will, that he may not be worshipped according to the imagination or devices of men, nor the suggestions of Satan, under any visible representations or in any other way not prescribed in the Holy Scriptures. And so
Hmm.
those last few sentences are what came to be known as the regulated principle of worship, which Southern
Yep.
Baptists originally held to strongly. And so back in those days, there wasn't football. It's somewhat anachronistic, I realize, to ask this question or weigh this on those scales, but they took it much more seriously than we do. And so I think what you and I are feeling here is perhaps a kind of a taking the Lord's Day lightly, and not even really considering what it's for. And do you think Baptists today? I mean, you're over. How many churches are in your the Three-Year Association?
We're at 104 right now. Yep.
Of the 104 churches and all the churches around, the South Carolina, the Deep South, how many of them think about the Lord's Day very seriously? Would you say?
Oh, it's a tiny percentage. I would say most vast majority. Yeah, I'd say it's a small percentage. If by
So,
seriously you mean, Second London Confession, Abstract of
right.
Principles, Charleston Confession, in that way serious, yeah, it's a very, very small number.
Yeah, I wonder just how many though even think more than, okay, we go to church and after that it's a second Saturday for us.
I think I wouldn't say churches would say that, but I think it's a
Yeah.
majority of the people in those churches would say that, yeah. I think what we're really dealing with here is kind of 2 questions. So I think the first question we're dealing with is the question of idolatry. Are Sundays for football is the best Sunday of the year Super Bowl Sunday? Because that's very idolatrous simply to say those things. So that's kind of that might be more of the symptom than the problem itself. The problem itself is the second question I think we're asking, which is what we've been spending a little bit more time on. And that's the idea of the Sabbath generally, or the Lord's Day more generally. So, yeah, I think it's 2 separate questions. I think it's 2 separate questions that definitely deserve discussion. because it's not necessarily as contentious as other theological issues, but it definitely has some debate going on in theological writings. So you see the John Frames and the Wayne Grudums and the Beaky and Smalleys of the world. I won't include the old dead guys like you like Turton and von Maestridge, because we all know what they're going to say. They're going to side strongly with Westminster for obvious reasons. But there is some, at least, discussion going on in contemporary theologies about the Sabbath. Not so much about idolatry. That's fairly well settled, I would say, but more about what the Lord's Day is and is not.
Yeah, it's interesting that John Bunyan, in his powerful book he wrote, Grace Abounding to the Chief Among Sinners, which is his testimony, personal testimony. John Bunyan had many struggles, acute struggles with assurance of his faith, and he outlines that in there. And one of the proofs he uses for what a hell-bound sinner he was, and what a carnal-minded man was, that he used to once in a while on the Lord's Day play a game of cat, which is sort of an early version of golf. It's not exactly like golf, but a game of cat. And so it's just interesting how seriously they took it back then. And I do think, I mean, I'll say this. I mean, I was a lover of the Puritans, and I read them just about every day in some form. Do I think they could go overboard with it? I do. I mean, I think, to discipline someone for playing a game of cat would probably be a little overboard. I think but I think maybe we've swung with the way we view the Lord and say that we've swung it all the way to the other side, because and I even wonder about this. How many? I'll ask you. How many churches do you think in the Three Rivers Association have a Sunday evening service?
Not very many anymore. Maybe 20%. That might even be too high.
Do you think that's because for this issue, that they just think that they sort of tend to think of the Lord's Day as, hey, we go to church and the rest of the day belongs, another Saturday or something like that? Or is it a lack of attendance? What would you think that's owing to? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's more lack of attendance, which one of the reasons for the lack of attendance could be either a misunderstanding or a misunderstanding of the Lord's Day, or a lack of care of concern for meeting with God's people again. I don't know what those reasons are, but I think a lack of attendance. I think another reason is, just to be frank, is overworked pastors. If you're going to, I remember MacArthur saying one time when he was on campus at Southern that he spent 40 hours a week per sermon writing those sermons. So let's just say you take half of that, you take 20 hours. If you're writing a Sunday morning, a Sunday night, and then a Wednesday night Bible study, you're 60 hours a week just studying and writing those messages. That's not a little amount of time. That's a full-time job and a half just in preparing and writing messages. So I think lack of attendance, I think overworked pastors. I think lack of attendance is probably the biggest. Whether or not it's due to a misunderstanding of the Lord's Day or something like that, I don't know. Yeah.
And also to be clear, raising that question, I'm not suggesting that churches that don't have Sunday evening service are wrong, or they've gone down some kind of slippery slope. I don't think that is necessarily true. The church I member of, we have once a month we have a Sunday evening. We have a members meeting, and they'll have a homily and things like that. It's we sing, we do things that look like a worship time during that. It's really good. But I've not. Yeah, I pastored two churches. A church in Alabama had Sunday evening service, and then the church in Louisville I pastored did not. And we had some people wanted to start it. We tried to start it, but we would have 8 people out of 120 people. We'd have 10 people in addition, including my family. And so it was a thing where, did we really want to prepare sermons for that kind of thing? And so I don't know what all's behind that. And one friend of mine has suggested is the proliferation of sports among that now Little League baseball and Pony League baseball, travel ball, they play on Sundays. We did not let my sons both were In fact, my oldest son was a very serious baseball player, but did not play on the Lord's Day. We just agreed that wasn't going to happen, and he played at a Christian school, and they did not, as a general rule, play on the Lord's Day anyway. Once in a blue moon, they'd have practice, and he would go to that. We weren't legalistic about it, but we just agreed he didn't like it, and of course, and he was one of the best players on the team. And so I don't know. It does seem like we have a lot of other things to do. And this, what we heard Sunday from the Super Bowl commentators of Sundays are for football is just, an assumption that even a lot of Christians, I think, would make as being, okay, it's fine to say that.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. If we're looking at following Scripture. I know, Jeff, you and I have talked about the regulative principle, the idea that Scripture regulates how our church is to function. If Scripture says it, either implicitly or explicitly, we can do it. If Scripture doesn't mention it, then we shouldn't. Obviously, if it says don't do it, we don't do it at all. But between the regulative principle and the normative, the idea of the normative principle. So what we see, though, in the book of Acts is a movement after the resurrection from the day of worship being Friday sundown to Saturday sundown over to Sunday. And what you see throughout Acts is the early church is always mentioned as when they were together on the first day of the week, which was always Sunday. So there is this major shift on the day of worship. In fact, one of the arguments that early apologists use to show that Christ really rose from the dead is the idea of the change of the day of worship from Friday sundown, Saturday sundown to Sunday, because the early church, the apostles, who were Jewish in their upbringing for the most part, would not at all have even entertained the idea of moving the Sabbath from Friday sundown, Saturday sundown to Sunday, unless there was some big reason for this. And the big reason for it is obviously because the resurrection takes place on Sunday. So the day of worship is moved to Sunday by the early church post-resurrection for the simple fact of celebrating the resurrection every single week when they come together on the first day. So we see Sunday is not for football. Sunday is indeed for worshiping the Lord, set apart specifically for that. What is then, maybe we should bat this around, what is then the best Sunday of the year? I think that'd be a fun question for us in the final few minutes that we have here. What is the best? Is there a best Sunday of the year?
See, I'm a baseball fan, so if the World Series was being played on Sunday, I would like that
Oh,
better
there
than
it
the
is.
Super Bowl Sundays.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't call that the best Sunday of the year. Especially I would like that if the Reds were playing it. I'm a Cincinnati
Yeah.
fan, but or the Braves. But no, I don't, and I think the answer is it's every Sunday. I don't think there is.
Yep.
I think the common answer would be Easter, of course. But I
Right.
would argue that every Sunday is a celebration of Easter. It's just, as you just put it. There's a transition, and of course a lot of this has to do with how you put the covenants and put the Bible together. But I think there is a transition to the first day of the week that's clearly made, and certainly the early church tradition followed that, and I think rightly so, because I think the regulated principle demands that we worship on Sunday. But I don't think there is a best Sunday of the year as far as it goes, because I think for the world, they might say a more accurate statement. The most fun Sunday of the year for the world is probably the Super Bowl Sunday, but the best Sunday is I personally, and I'm sure you're in this camp too. You've been in ministry like me a long time. I love the Lord's Day. I love Sunday. I love going to church. It's not hard for me to go to church. If we had a Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, Sunday night service, it would be hard for me to go to all those because I've grown up that way and love it. And so,
Right.
to me, I look forward to Sunday, whether I'm usually, especially if I'm preaching. But I look forward to Sundays, and so every Sunday is is the best Sunday in my mind. And I don't think the Bible certainly doesn't mark out one Sunday as the best. I mean, the best Sunday in history was the first Easter when Jesus rose from
Right.
dead. That's probably the greatest, most world sort of seismic Sunday in the history of the world that turned the world upside down. But as far as the best, besides that one, I don't think you can argue anyone's better than the other. They're all glorious if you understand it in a biblical sense.
Yeah, I would agree. It's one of the things that, to use a Southern proverbial phrase, one of the things that's always chapped my hide is when you hear people talk about Easter Sunday as the best Sunday of the year, the biggest Sunday of worship, whatever. When it's really not a commemoration on that particular day. That's the day every single year that Jesus rose from the dead, which is why Easter fluctuates. It's all based on the lunar phases of the moon as to when that Sunday actually appears on our calendar. And from an umbrella way of looking at it, Christian churches have differed on their calendars with one Sunday or another Sunday based on which church you're in, which larger Christian tradition you're in. But yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly that every Sunday, the Sunday before Easter is just as important as Easter Sunday, is just as important as the following Sunday, is just important as the second Sunday in November, or whatever it may be. That every single Sunday is a celebration of the resurrection of Christ. And yes, churches, because of the push in American culture for selling greeting cards and candy, look specifically to that one Sunday of the year that's referred to as Easter. Every single Sunday is Resurrection Sunday. Every Sunday is the day when believers gather to celebrate the resurrection, which also, I think, brings up a whole nother point that we don't have time for today, but brings up a whole nother point of what is the corporate gathering on Sunday for? Should it be geared more towards unbelievers or geared more towards believers? Which again, is something we don't have time to deal with today. Maybe we do that in a later podcast, but I think that might be an interesting discussion as well. But nonetheless, I'm in full agreement. Every Sunday is the Lord's Day, not just one in the spring every year.
Yeah, that is a good topic for a future podcast because we're out of time with this one. And I do, there's a country song came out a few years ago, and, love good old country music. And Craig Morgan wrote a song, What I Love About Sunday. You may remember that song. Actually, a friend of mine, Adam Dorsey, went to Southern Seminary with us, wrote that song. And, and it goes through what you experience on a typical Sunday, starting with church here in the Deep South. And it does include football, which is interesting. But I love Sunday, and I'm glad we could, that this raised the opportunity to talk about it. And I would love to see Southern Baptists take Sunday more seriously. Let's say that. You don't have to hold to the regular principle, but take it more seriously and see it as the time of worship. Thank you for listening to this podcast of the Baptist Courier and Courier Publishing. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell to make sure you never miss an episode. Be sure to follow us on all social media platforms and send any question you want us to consider to courierconversations@gmail.com.